Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for asking, though, Bob.
All right, so we will get rolling. So thank you for joining us today. And if you would, Brad, just kind of give us an overview of the last term for you as mayor and what you hope to still accomplish in the next 4 years should you be reelected.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's interesting when you look back on a 4-year time span of all the things that have gone on, and honestly, I'm proud of the results that we've been able to accomplish in the last 4 years. I mean, there's quite a bit on the list. I think it's pretty much in keeping with the priorities that we have identified as a city council too. But one of the things that I preached fairly often in our prioritization of things was this idea of building a strong foundation of a city, and in many ways, I think we've been pretty successful with that. Public safety is one example. We have made some real headway in working towards increased and appropriate staffing for fire and police, and then also our first responders at the 911 center too. Facilities is another thing that we've worked on with that. 911 is a good example there. Fire station facilities in particular. Still need to work on the police facilities, but we're on the right track with all those things. So we've increased pay, we've worked on retention. All those things I think are really important. If you don't have a strong public safety net in a city, then you're not much of a city. You don't really have much of a foundation. So I think that's been a really important focus. Infrastructure has been another really important one. So the road work that we've done, I think, has been particularly successful. We've been able to resurface more miles of road than usual almost every single year in the last 4 years. And I think you see that when you go around town, you feel the difference between Dubuque and other places. And that means big road projects too. The funding for the overpass was a difficult thing to get. It was not an easy. It was just not easy to do. So we really fought for it and advocated for it, and I think we had some good luck getting that with the federal government in the time that it was available. And I'm glad that we did that because it's going to be very necessary. I mean, we've needed a new overpass over the railroad for a long time, but in particular right now with the developments on the railroad and the increases in traffic that we're going to see there, it's going to be more and more necessary. I think other projects too that have been important have been flood mitigation projects. So this idea of continuing on with the B branch and the gates and pumps project, we're able to finally get that kicked off. Obviously some recent news on pausing that currently, but we were able to get that kicked off and finally moving after some stalls. And then a continued focus this year on the flood mitigation going forward. I think we saw at least 3 really good examples of the need for that this summer with the storms that we had that were just very sudden and very strong. And that's the kind of thing we need to focus on. The other part of the foundation that we haven't talked about as much lately, but we worked really hard on for a couple of years, was the staffing within the city of Dubuque itself. So actually getting the staff to a point where people are paid what they need to be paid based on comparisons across the state and across the Midwest. And that's so that we can have good recruitment and good retention for these positions. And I think it's kind of one of those other pieces. If you don't have a strong city government of all the public servants that are doing the work and the people that are there doing it, and you don't have people that feel they're valued and can be easily retained in those positions, then it's going to be difficult to move that stuff forward. A couple other things, and then I'll stop and go on to the next questions. But I think moving forward with the Central and White focus that we've had for a few years. I remember when I first ran for council, this idea of revitalizing the Central Avenue corridor was really kicking off. And now that we've made a decision on how the roadways are going to look there and how the streetscape is going to look, we're really moving forward with being able to develop in that area for both housing and commercial. So I think that that's a really important development too. Childcare, we haven't talked about childcare much, but I realized in the last 4 years we've made some real headway on moving forward with having more access to childcare, more slots available, and then also the partnership with GDDC and businesses to be able to have better pay for childcare workers. I think that's been a really great thing. Can't forget about air service, obviously. As much as I'd like to stop having us talk about air service so much, it's been a real challenging issue. I mean, it just is. When people talk to me about it, I am fully open with them and saying it is the most difficult thing that I've had to deal with as mayor. And I kind of knew it from the start. I mean, the moment that I got that phone call from American Airlines, I knew that this was going to be pretty much my entire term of dealing with this, just because of the way the landscape looked. The other thing I'm proud of is that, we continue to do this in a way that is very responsible from a financial standpoint. I mean, as a city, we tout our low taxes and, fees for services that are generally in line with other places, but we also do it with low debt. I mean, it's around 30%. It's a really low debt load, and we have great ratings from Moody's, and we're winning awards for what we do. I think we should be proud of the work that we're doing there. There's more on the list, but I'll stop there for now. We can talk about other things.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we can talk a bit about housing. That's certainly something that
I
is
totally forgot
been
housing,
an
didn't I?
issue.
Sorry.
It's been a big issue this election
Yep.
season. So yeah, give us your take on kind of the highlights and
Yeah.
what do you say to the person who says, oh, we didn't need that, or we don't need that, there's too much city money going to it. Talk about some of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of those interesting areas where my background as a social worker, and especially somebody who taught in social work, I think I come to the table with some knowledge of how this looks in other parts of the country and how this issue affects people on a very basic human level. The bottom line is we were told very clearly that we needed housing. We had a very good study that was done that said we needed 1,100 units at least. And then we have, having Greater Dubuque Development Corporation and do the interviews that they do on an annual basis with over 200 businesses, and then have the housing be at the top of the needs list almost every single year. It's a really clear message that says we need this. And then you hear from community members, maybe that aren't related with economic development agencies or all these things, just people living their lives here in Dubuque. And what they tell you pretty specifically and fairly often is that housing just costs too much for a city our size. So you deal with that by creating volume. You create more housing. And I think some places will choose to try to create very specific housing in very specific places. But one of the things that is interesting when you look at housing research across the country and ways that things actually work is you see that with a volume issue, you just need housing, and people will move across that spectrum of housing. So one of the things so with us, it wasn't important to me in the moment that we were in these last few years to say, all right, we're only going to incentivize housing downtown, or we're only going to incentivize housing on the north end. I think the city council made the right decision in saying we're going to incentivize all housing, and we're going to do it at a higher level than we've done in the past, because we're being encouraged to do that by our economic development organizations, by the chamber, by developers themselves. People wanted housing. So we just said, all right, we're going to incentivize this more. Where do you want to build? And honestly, I think it's worked better than I even anticipated. I mean, all over the community, we've got housing on the north end, on the west side, we've got housing downtown, we've got housing going in on the south side of town. I mean, it really is everywhere. And it's a lot of apartments, which is a new push. That's something that hasn't happened for a long time in Dubuque, but it is a lot of apartments that go in. But what's going to happen there in the next few years is people are going to move across that spectrum of housing. There will be people who will move out of their home, who no longer want to live in a home. They'll move into some of these apartments. That opens that home up for another home buyer to be able to come in and have a place where they might want to have a starter home or their next, step up in home ownership. So all of that spectrum is what we're going to see over the next few years. So I think we've actually done a very good job. I think we should all be very proud of where we are from a housing standpoint. I know that there are people that are going to have specific ideas about specific places that housing was built, but I honestly think that, the thought that we put into it as a city council, the work that we've done with developers, because I want to make sure, that I always remind everybody that the city doesn't build any housing. We don't have any public housing in the city of Dubuque. We don't do any of the building. This is something that somebody has come to the city and said, we want to build this project. Will you provide us with a development agreement or any sort of tax incentives to do this? Will you sell us this piece of land to build housing? So I think that we've done a good job. I think in the years ahead, the number one thing is we stay out of our way enough that housing gets built, and we're starting to see some of that move along. So that's good. I don't think there's, the whole idea of red tape. I don't think there's a ton of red tape standing in the way of housing development currently, but we need to be careful that there's not. So if there's anything that we're doing that can speed things up and move it along, I think we should. And then what we need to do over the next few years is really watch, and we might be getting to a point where we need to incentivize certain parts of town versus others. Maybe we have enough in some place. We don't need a certain type of housing. We need to be careful that we're looking at it that way. But our approach so far is to sort of open the floodgates, and it worked very, very well.
Okay. Yeah, speaking of that sort of red tape, it kind of takes me back to a couple of years ago when we really had the city doing battle with local developers being pretty angry with the city, and kind of put some pieces in place to try to have conversations there and to make that relationship, to lower the level of animosity and really start working together. How successful has that been? What sort of changes were made that led to eliminating some of that red tape? And is there more that can still be done? I mean, I think we still hear some sour grapes from some developers about the city, and how much of that is just bound to come with the territory.
Yeah. All right. So you packed a lot in there, Amy. So I'll try to unpack as much as I can there. I'll start with the end of what you said. Of course, there's always going to be people who are upset, and I don't think you can ever get to a point where you're not going to have some people upset. Then there are clearly in our situation, I think if this whole situation was fixed in everybody's mind, then there wouldn't be a group of people running primarily on this issue against the city council. I mean, this idea of the developer letter, I think, is still the thing that appears to be the impetus for a lot of what I'm hearing from the opposition in this campaign. So clearly there are still some people who are not quite who are not content with the way things are. But I will say, though, that when you look at the evidence and you see what we've actually been able to pull off, I don't think we would have as much development as we have right now. Especially, we just talked about housing. I mean, there are many different housing developments that are currently coming out of the ground. We wouldn't have that if we still had the same problems that we had before. And I'm still not entirely clear on the whole scope of what those problems were. This really happened when it was my first year as mayor, when I started to hear about these issues. And when I did have conversations with people about these issues, what I learned is that a lot of the issues stemmed from things that happened 5, 10, and even longer years ago. That it was things that people had carried through and I'll say, baggage from relationships that had gone on for a long time. And I think that's going to happen in any community. I think you're going to have that. What's important is how we responded. And I do think that the city made a good faith effort to respond as well as we could, and the city council specifically. So, for instance, the incentives that we offered to provide for housing development, we increased those incentives. We looked closely at incentives for for manufacturing development and industrial development, and we've seen quite a bit of that in that time too. There's been quite a bit of development in the West End industrial complex. On Kerper, we had Clower doing development work out there and increasing their space. So we've seen those things happen, and that was after the conversation that we had about development in Dubuque. I also think that our processes have been more smooth. I think that the development review team made changes that tried to make that an easier process for people. I think that we put attention on the work that the engineers have to do to be able to get these things done, that the city planners have to do. I think there's, the work of building a city never, ever ends. So we're always going to have to keep working on the relationships. We're going to have to keep working on the process, and we're going to have to listen closely if there's something that's a sticking point. And I do still hear about some sticking points here and there that I think we need to continue to move forward with. And then you also run into bigger things, like, you run into issues where you might be planning ahead. You think you're doing everything you need to be doing, and then you find out that you've actually reached a capacity in a certain level of the sewer system, for example. And those types of things are going to happen when you're working in a city our size that is developing at the rate that we're developing. So I actually think we're doing a really good job when it comes to this development piece of the puzzle. And I think that we can continue to make improvements on that.
Brad, can you elaborate a little bit more or follow up on that, the sewer capacity thing? Because that is something that, I think some people say, hey, we should have seen this coming, or we weren't planning ahead, or whatever it is. And, You know,
Yeah.
is there anything we could have done differently there? Or
Yeah, I looked closely at that once we learned about this issue, and I looked backwards to see, what was it that we had done? Had we missed something as a city council, for instance, had we not prioritized this along the way? Had something occurred that made this more difficult? So what I will say is that I do not think that the city council that I have been the mayor of, or that I was on, did anything to slow the process down, or didn't look ahead fast enough. We prioritized sewer infrastructure actually every single year since I've been on the council, if my recollection is correct. The only things that really slowed that down were COVID. I hate to always bring COVID up as a thing, but it still was a thing. I mean, if you remember, there were position freezes and all kinds of issues that just stopped the flow of money until we realized what we would have from federal government providing some assistance to move forward. So that was a big thing. But the other big thing was this environmental study that happened with the current Old Mill Road lift station, and how that slowed things down for 18 months. I honestly think that was probably the biggest factor that really kept the fixes from moving forward as fast as we wanted them to move forward. And then at the same time that we did that, we saw an increase in development in that area of Dubuque like we haven't seen in years. I mean, we just have not seen housing going up. We haven't seen the industrial development happening. We added new businesses to the West End. So I think all of it together just came to a point where we now all of a sudden found ourselves at this place where we had reached a capacity that we didn't anticipate reaching, because we had been spending money on it. We had been investing. We could have invested more. I mean, you can always spend more money, but that means you also have to raise more revenue. So you have to raise more taxes, you have to raise more fees. It's a balancing act that every city has to strike. And one of the things that, this isn't an excuse at all, but one of the things that does strike me is when you go and talk to any mayor in any part of the country, most of them are talking about things like this. They're talking about backlogs of infrastructure work that they haven't been able to do. They're talking about things that didn't move quite as fast as they wanted. They're talking about major upgrades to like what our water and resource recovery center is. So this is not an uncommon problem in any city of our size to have. Would it have been nice to be able to move faster than we did? Absolutely. But I think we found ourselves where we found ourselves, even despite the fact that we were planning ahead. And I do think that we were investing wisely in getting this work done. And I do think that the problem is going to rectify itself rather quickly over the next couple of years. Once the Old Mill Road lift station is online, that's a major part of the capacity issue that will go forward. Then once the size of the pipes is expanded around that area and going out in the Catfish Creek watershed, it will no longer be a problem within the next 3 years.
Hey, Brad, you had said that you felt like the city has made an effort to respond to the concerns of the developers. And you said you felt like we would not have as much development if we didn't make some of the changes or change our direction. Yet you also said that the developer letter is coming up as kind of a political issue during this election cycle. So what is the disconnect there? If it's coming up as a election issue, is the feeling widespread that the city is not responding?
I guess definition of widespread matters there, Mike. I think, how many people are still upset versus how many people are just moving forward. I think I don't know if that's entirely possible to tell exactly how many people are feeling this way. I guess, your original question is what's the disconnect there? I do struggle with that answer. I'm not entirely sure, because I talk to a lot of people in our city. I know sometimes it can be claimed that, the mayor's just talking to his own people or whatever, but that's just not true with me. I make a concerted effort to be in as many places and talk to as many different kinds of people as I possibly can. And I get around the city. And then during a campaign season, if you're doing it right, you're talking to a lot of people. People are really happy in this community. They like the way things are going. They like the direction that we're seeing. I had this great example of a 82-year-old woman on her doorstep with a big smile on her face who said to me, Dubuque is always changing for the better. You know, and this is a person who has lived in the same place for decades. And I think that that sentiment is a very strong one. Now, do 50% of people feel that way? Do 60% of people feel that way? I guess we're going to find out. You know, I think that that's what elections are all about. There are always going to be people who are upset. I don't know exactly how we can find all the ways to move forward so that we are all equally happy with the way things are. I don't know if we're going to get there. I mean, we can try, and I think that that's what I want to do. I want to try to get there. But this idea that I guess I could say is currently the seems to be the main theme of the opposition that I'm running against right now is that our city is a failing city, that it's not working, that the things we've done one step after another have generally been wrong. And I just respectfully disagree with that. I don't think that that's the case. I think there's much more evidence to the contrary, that we are actually doing very well, that we are solving problems in a way that works pretty well. I think it's telling that people that have not traditionally developed in our city have entered into the market and started to develop here. I mean, we've got some people that have become pretty big players in the development scene and in making projects move forward. You know, and they are people who have developed in other cities. And when you talk to some of these developers, they say Dubuque's pretty easy to work with compared to other places. I won't name names, but you know, other cities that are fairly near to us that come up in the conversation quite a bit. So there is definitely a disconnect, and I think we need to continue to explore what that is and why that is the case. And once this election is over, it's going to be an opportunity to once again sit down at the table and come to as much of a unification as we possibly can. But I hope that everybody wants to actually get there. I think that's going to be important in this because we've got a lot of exciting things on the horizon. I mean, a ton. You know, I mentioned the medical school, Field of Dreams, development downtown, all the housing we already talked about. There's a lot of great stuff that's happening in Dubuque, and I'm hoping that we can just all generally agree enough to move forward in that direction. I think what we're likely to see here is, based on what I'm hearing from people, is that people like the direction that we're going, and we're going to continue to go in that direction, and hopefully everybody decides to come along for that ride.
I think likewise, you know, the airport issue, it's kind of been susceptible to some of those, you know, same feelings that you're talking about, where, you know, if you only knew what you read on social media, you know, you would have a very different impression of what, you know, what's really happening, I think, in the city. So I'm sure you have to kind of balance that with, okay, people that say, oh my gosh, it's crazy to spend this kind of money on air service, and knowing how much we need air service. So
right.
So where's sort of the balance for you? Where do you think the sentiment really lies? And I mean, how long does it make sense to spend public money to support it? I mean, assuming we know that we need to run out the tape here for a little bit. We have right. a commitment already, but do we have this same conversation a year from now?
Right. Yeah. Good questions. Yeah. And this is, you know, like I said in the beginning of the conversation, this has been the most challenging issue that I've dealt with in this role by far. And it's because of all the layers. There are so many layers to air service. There's private business involved, there's air carriers, there's the federal government, there's the local government, there's the county government, there's all of us together. So, you know, to try and simplify it as much as possible, I think we've come to a really clear decision point here. After all these years of trying to make this work. So we, you know, really, it's been for 3 solid years we've been working on this to try and get to a point where first we get flights back and then we get flights to sustain themselves. I see two ways forward right now. One is what we just decided as a city council actually works. We provide local tax dollars for a short period of time, potentially through June of next year. We actually have a decision point in December 1st, and then our next decision point really will be in April during the budget hearings of the fiscal 27 budget. During those 2 times, if we see the minimum revenue guarantee shrinking enough that we say, okay, let's keep trying and see if we can move it forward. And I don't even know what enough is. I'm not prepared to say what that amount of money needs to be small, like how small that amount of money needs to be for the minimum revenue guarantee to say, all right, let's keep trying. But if it gets small enough and it looks like Denver Air is going to be able to provide this service to us in a sustainable way without us funding it with local tax dollars at large margins, and this is important, and also that they're on a path to adding more flights. If we see that they are shrinking that MRG that we require to pay them, and we are getting ourselves on a path where we can seriously have a discussion about adding more daily flights to the airport, then that's one option. I think that's the sustainable private enterprise type of option. Second option, if that doesn't work, and we are still looking in December and then potentially into June, or I should say April, really, potentially into April, and we're still paying out $200,000 to $300,000 in a monthly minimum revenue guarantee. We belong in the Essential Air Service Program. We belong in EAS. EAS is the program that other cities our size in Iowa are part of. The EAS is a federal government program that uses federal tax dollars to fund daily air service at smaller airports. And it might be just one flight a day. It might be a couple flights a day, but it is a ongoing, perpetual minimum revenue guarantee. We cannot be responsible for that as a local government. It is entirely unfair to the people of Dubuque that we would be responsible to pay for that with our own local tax dollars that should be funding other things, these other priorities like I mentioned earlier, because that's what the Essential Air Service Program is for. Quick step back. Our first point to Congress, to our congressional delegation was, how about we get into the EAS program? And when we said that, there was a very strong reaction from our congressional delegation that is not on the table. We are not talking about EAS. It's not available. We haven't opened that door for any community since 2012, I think it was, and we're not going to open it now. And we said, okay, fine. What can we do then? And to their credit, they helped us get that small community air service development grant that helped to fund the beginning portion of this flight. But EAS has never been put back on the table as an option. It needs to be if we don't make it with this short-term solution that we're using right now.
Brad, is there any opportunity, Brad, to get a second SCASD grant or additional SCASD funds? Is that, and without, if EAS is off the table or off the table for now, are there other federal fund options that might be out there?
It is the only other federal fund option that I know of, SCASD, and it is only open to communities every 5 years. So we would not have another opportunity for another few years with the way that rules are currently written.
I was going to ask regarding the federal delegation and who will, once again, we'll be seeing some movement with some changes, yeah, and people running for different offices. Is it a matter of that's just a closed door, or is it something that we could become an election issue, and maybe somebody new could say something I could advocate or see a way to get some traction on? Yeah.
Realistically, it needs to become more than just a local election issue. Honestly, it needs to be something that lots of other members of Congress would look at and say, yes, we would be willing to do that. The other part of this that's frustrating is we got to be realistic about it. If this works and suddenly we decide that, okay, we do want to continue as a community to have this air service, we're going to fly more, and it becomes sustainable, that is absolutely the best route. I mean, that is just the best case scenario if we get to that point. Because on the other side of that coin, if we have to go back to the federal government and talk about the Essential Air Service Program, I mean, we don't exactly have a fully functioning Congress right now. They are struggling mightily with getting along and being able to make things happen. They're struggling annually to pass laws at all. And that's just, I'm not saying that to be mean or to blame anybody. It's just a fact that Congress is in a difficult place historically. we don't have an easy road ahead of us to go to them and any member of Congress, our own or any others, and say, hey, can we open this door to the Essential Air Service program again and let us in? It's not an easy path. It wasn't an easy path during the last presidential administration. It's not an easy path during this one. You know, it doesn't seem to matter. Well, I'll say that just currently with the situation where it is and the challenges that we see in Washington, it is a difficult proposition for us to have to get to that point. And I think it's one of the other reasons why this was a better route to take first. You know, we had to try this way first. I think we would still be without air service had we not gone with the SCASD program and gone with things that we've done. I mean, I don't think that EAS would have been open to us by now if that was the only route that we took.
And so you kind of framed it as there's two options: if it becomes self-sustaining, or we try to get into EAS. But given the comments that you just made, if we don't see in the next 6 months that it's becoming self-sustaining, and it's probably unlikely that EAS will change in the next 6 months. I mean, what
Right.
becomes a scenario then?
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like the scenario then. This is a very thorny situation for us in Dubuque. I mean, we are in a really tight spot with this issue, because that is exactly what your point kind of makes, is that there aren't other good options. I know you just, for instance, had a letter to the editor that asked, why don't we just talk to the University of Dubuque and have them start flying? That was the first thing that we actually talked about when we got together around the table. We said, all right, what are our options? Can we start our own airline as a community, like Dubuque Air? We're just going to be our own airline. Well, the joke is, if you want to be a millionaire, get $1 billion and start an airline, and then you'll be able to be a millionaire. So that's the joke. But the point is that it's not an easy business model. It doesn't really work. Nobody really does it that way. You can't have a community that starts this. Then we went and talked to the University of Dubuque and talked to the other airlines like American and United and other places, and said, hey, we've got this great flight school. Can we have like a feeder system of some sort, where we help you out a little bit and then you help us out by providing flights, where it all sort of is a partnership that can work together. That's not the way it works, is what we learned. That, American has its own flight school that a lot of our UD students will then go to before they start flying commercially. United has its own. Everybody does their own thing. It's not a model that is really a realistic one. So, my dog has decided he's coming to the meeting, so he's in the room, just so you know. That's the door open behind me. So, all these options that we thought about, like all these different things that we tried to look at, were things that we've already discussed, and we've kind of landed where we are. So that's why when I say we have two options, I think that's, as of right now, with the knowledge that I have, I think that's realistically what we have. The only other option is what you just pointed out, Allie, is that we would lose it all. And we just would be without it, and we'd have to just sit and wait for it to come back.
On another topic, the next council, whoever is elected, will be tasked with choosing the next city manager for the city of Dubuque.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a bit about what you would see that looking like, and maybe what are some of the lessons learned from the city manager you had? Are there qualities in Mike Van Milligan that you definitely want to see, and are there things that maybe you'd like to see a different style or approach? Yeah.
Well, I mean, a couple of bottom lines. The first is that, I mean, you can't argue with some of the major successes that Dubuque has seen under Mike Van Milligan's time as the city manager. I mean, there's been some major successes for sure. And the other thing that I've learned about city managers and working with, the Iowa League of Cities and the National League of Cities, is that there are a lot of different personalities in city managers. They're not all the same, even close. But I'll tell you what we're going to need is we're going to need somebody who is ready to hit the ground sprinting. I mean, they are going to need to be the type of leader that can learn very quickly, that can build very quick partnerships across the community, and be ready to manage a staff and the resources that we have through some major projects. There's a lot on the list right now, and it's all going to be moving forward pretty quickly. And some of it is outside of the city government stuff. So I'll bring the medical school back up again. You know, you've got the Field of Dreams. It's basically filling up hotel rooms every weekend in the city of Dubuque. You've got all this stuff that's happening. So we're at this point where we're sort of like on the cusp of this new growth that we haven't seen in a long time. And I really do think it's going to lead to both amenity and population growth. I think the trajectory is absolutely there. So I think we're going to need to do a national search, and we're going to need to find the right person who has the experience and the knowledge and the skill set to be able to carry that forward. That person might already be working for the city of Dubuque, but I still think that we need to give it a good shot to look across the whole country, because the other thing that I've learned about Dubuque, and I didn't know this until I became mayor and started to travel to some of these conferences, is that we are absolutely on the country's radar. People talk about us all the time. They talk about the projects that we've done. They talk about the ways that we've interacted with our federal government partners, for example. There's a lot of discussion about the great things that Dubuque has done and all the ways that we've been successful. So people will be attracted to this job, and I'm looking forward to going through that process.
One other thing that sort of has come up when we're talking about sort of big issues that have been taken up by either your opponent or there seem to be some similar opinions among the folks who are opposing the incumbents this year is, and you brought this up a little bit earlier, is around the city's sort of fiscal responsibility. There's some concern about city spending, and is that being done wisely? How do you feel like the city is doing as far as spending our tax dollars, both efficiently and effectively?
Yeah. I guess I just don't see much evidence that it's not being done efficiently and effectively and responsibly. If you look at our budget and you look at our tax asking and our debt load, and you compare it to other cities in Iowa that are like us, I mean, we're doing very, very well. And you don't get a good Moody's rating if you're handling your money poorly. You don't get awards from organizations that look at your fiscal situation. You don't get those if you're handling your money poorly. I think, unfortunately, people that are criticizing that aren't looking broadly enough outside of Dubuque. I think I'm not sure what they're comparing it to, but they need to compare it to other things that are similar. They need to compare it to other cities and other ways that we do things. There's every decision you make about where you're going to spend $1 of tax money towards a program or a person or whatever it is, building, whatever. Every decision you make is a balancing act. You have to think about it and think about it in the context of every other dollar that you're spending in an annual budget or in a 10-year time frame. And some of those decisions you look back on, 10 years from when you spent the money, and you think, oh, maybe we should have done it a little bit differently. But 10 years ago was a really different time. I'll go back to COVID, for example. Do I wish that we would have not had the wage freezes that we did so things didn't slow down? Absolutely. I wish we would have kept paying everybody exactly what we were supposed to and keep hiring and doing all those things. But we had no idea that ARPA was going to happen. You never know those things. You don't know that you're going to have federal government step in and provide money for you to be able to do other projects to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars for places. I mean, it was significant money. I mean, we're still, being able to do things like beautify parks and add new parks to the system with some of those ARPA dollars. So nobody had any idea that that was going to happen. And it's hard to remember how bleak those moments were when you're 5 years past it. But if you really think back to those moments and how scary it was when, it was my third month as a council member. I'm learning the ropes, and all of a sudden, bam, you get a pandemic. And then the next year, you have to figure everything out in your shorts and a t-shirt while you're on virtual meetings, and that's the kind of stuff that it affects how you plan going forward. And it just makes a big impact. And it's not the kind of stuff you can look back on with 2020 hindsight and be fair to the decisions that you made in those moments right there. But that all said, it's all a balancing act. And for people to put it so simply, I think is an injustice to the difficult work that this is. I don't think it's a realistic way of looking at what it means to be the mayor or what it means to be on the city council, because all these decisions come with a huge amount of weight that you have to think about when you're thinking about the next 20 years. So you do your best with what you have. And I think that we've actually done very, very well. I think that we're handling both our revenue collection, our spending, and our debt very responsibly.
Brad, not long before the air service became a hot topic about city spending, the Five Flags was at the forefront of taxpayer dollars going to cover a facility in Dubuque. Curious to what your thoughts are on what the path forward looks like for the Five Flags.
Yeah. That kind of brings up the fact that, is there ever a slow news day around here anymore? I mean, we went from Five Flags to air service to development. I mean, it just sometimes feels like, sometimes I wake up and hear some of these things and I'm like, seriously? Now we've got that to go with? Man, there's just constantly stuff happening. But part of it is that
I will say, on the bright side, Brad, covering that daily news cycle is your local TH Media.
That's right. That's exactly right. But it's also there's another bright side to this too, though, and it is what I said earlier. I think we are at that point as a city. I think there was a slow time for us. I think there were some times where things were just sort of like chugging along, and then we had these moments where things sort of accelerated. And you know, you were all there for this. I was gone for a part of it, but the port, you know, doing the port stuff, working on Lower Main and improving those things. We had the acceleration with the Millwork District. You know, you had even the schools. I mean, some of the acceleration points that we've had with schools where you had, you know, work done at Hempstead, work done at Senior, all that stuff. So that's all the good. And I think we're at a point now where we're going to see a whole lot of this in the next few years. And I think there's a level of growing pains that you have to deal with to go through some of that. But back to Five Flags, back to the point. So I actually think the plan that we have right now is most in keeping with what people generally have decided that they wanted. We never really got a chance to move forward with the big stuff with Five Flags. You know, we never put anything before the voters or a referendum. That got stalled out, again, right around the time of the pandemic. But I honestly, you know, looking back on that one, I think that where we landed is probably the best place we can be in this moment, at least, which is we didn't need more parking downtown. So we realized that we had money set aside for that parking ramp to about $25 million, give or take. And that got shifted over to redo the inside of Five Flags, which I think will be very effective in making it a better place for people to experience the entertainment and the things that go on within Five Flags. You know, it's funny. I don't often talk about my experience as a new business owner downtown, but one of the things that I notice is that when there's something happening at Five Flags, my sales go up. I mean, there are people that are walking around and moving around downtown in that area near Five Flags. And I can tell that that is a driver for lots of different things. So the more action we can have there and the better it can be for a person's experience, for the, you know, the actual customer experience in there and the performer experience, I think will be a very good thing. Along with the theater, we don't talk about the theater as much as the arena, but the theater needs a lot of work too. And this money will be helping to make significant improvements within that theater, which is a real asset. I mean, that is just, even if you just hang out at the Julian Dubuque International Film Festival every single year, that place is such a hub of activity, the Five Flags Theater right there. So I think we're on the right path for that for this moment. So over the next few years is when those renovations are going to be completed.
Real quick,
follow up on that. You talked about redirecting parking funds towards renovating Five Flags. I think some people have questions about how much flexibility there is in the city budget with regard to expenditures and moving stuff from one line item to the other. And is that a council decision? Is there a threshold at which it's a council decision versus a city manager or staff decision? And because I think for some people that concept seems kind of opaque.
Yeah, and you know, I'll be honest that in some ways it's a little frustrating for me with that perspective sometimes. And here's why: is because I sit in those chambers until 11:30 at night sometimes on a regular basis, talking about all these things, you know. So what I think is the challenge is we do the work in the open, but people don't often see that work being done in the open, even though it's available to them to see it. So your question of, if you're going to move $25 million from one project to another, absolutely that's a council decision. And it was an action item on an agenda to be able to do that. I can't remember exactly when it was. I want to say it was like 2 years ago that we did that, but it was absolutely on an agenda to do those things. Most of the things that actually all the money that is spent, all the money that is moved from one place to another is on a council agenda in one form or another. There's no secret shell game of moving money around in the city of Dubuque. We do it out in the open, and it's done like many other major businesses. I mean, we have a $275 million budget in the city of Dubuque, give or take. It's a little higher than that now. But with that budget, you're going to have a lot of different money that moves from a lot of different budget lines. You're going to have positions that don't fill, and that money's going to be opened up for something else. You're going to have capital projects that didn't work out for whatever reason, or they got stalled, and you can move that money to something else that can go faster. Those decisions are all there and there to be out in the open. And sometimes it's a matter of how we say that. What I will say about the city of Dubuque, from my perspective, I see our city staff and then those of us on the city council making a good faith effort to get the word out about how these things are happening and what's going on. I see that good faith effort happening. And you all help, because not everybody has a local paper to be able to tell this story, but you do. I mean, we do, and you're there. So we make a good faith effort to get that information out there. But what happens once the information is out, where it goes, that's the difficult challenge.
As we wrap up here, my quick question was going to be in follow up regarding parking. Can you just give us a few sentences on your overview? Did we make some wrong decisions about parking and building parking? Or are we on the right path?
I have trouble judging the decisions that were made in the 1950s and 60s. I think that it was a very different time. This whole idea of urban renewal was a very different mindset than we have right now. And when they knocked down a whole city block and built just a whole city block of parking ramps, it's pretty easy for us to look back on that now and go, did we really need all that? But what I will say is, I'm not ready to say, hey, let's start knocking down parking ramps next week in this moment. And the reason is, I don't think we have a good sense yet of what the effect is going to be from the increased development that we're seeing over the next 5 years. So there's some serious development in the downtown core. Again, the medical school, the apartments that John Gronin and his team are building right across the medical school. We've got lots of apartments that are going in the town clock plaza area that are being built right now. You've got that residential space, which will then drive, hopefully, more commercial space, and you're going to see more action downtown. At that point, I think we'll have we should have a very realistic view on what kind of parking needs we truly have in that area. And then I think, can make some decisions about ramps, for example. As far as surface lots go, I think right now we can be totally comfortable with selling city surface lots and building something on them. I don't think there's any problem with that at all. If there is somebody that wants to do that, I do think we have plenty of parking that is available in ramps and along the streets. And that's also going to change here in the next year. It's an important part of this conversation. As we put the new technology in the ramps and then new technology for parking meters, that's going to change how the system functions. And I think that's going to be something we need to get used to too. So there's a lot of moving parts there. And I think that we do need to continue to have a conversation about parking. But I think if we started swinging a wrecking ball tomorrow, we would be getting ahead of our skis on that one.
Okay, I told you we wouldn't take up too much of your time today. So just wrapping up, anything that we didn't hit on you want to be sure to say, or that you would sum up, I guess, for your voters?
As far as issues go, we didn't talk much about parks, and that's been a big conversation. I do think it's notable that in the last budget cycle, when we were going through the budget hearings, I heard about parks probably more than anything else. It was one of those things that was really a common theme, and it was the stuff that we actually just dealt with. So the Eagle Point Park has obviously been a big discussion topic, and this is an interesting issue because I do hear a divided group on this. You've got people who are enjoying the more natural space. You want people who want more of a manicured park. You've got different levels of memory of what the park used to look like versus what it is now. What I think we have in Eagle Point Park is we have a space that is really unique. We have something that needs to strike a balance between a very natural habitat for animal life and all kinds of things, and then a place that is also a park that has a certain level of care and manicured nature to it, so we can, you know, enjoy it like that kind of a park too. But we have to strike that balance there, and I think we're working our way towards that. There's definitely maintenance that needs to be done, and I think it is getting done. I mean, we're starting to fund it now. We've also had some success in being able to start to fund some of the other projects people really wanted. Resurfacing of tennis courts and potentially making those into things like pickleball courts and that kind of thing. So I'm feeling good about the direction that we're going, but there's definitely, parks are an incredibly important amenity, and the people of Dubuque have made that really clear. So we want to make sure that we continue to do that. That's the only issue that I can think of that we didn't really cover in the discussion. But other than that, I guess what I would say is just, you know, I'm proud of the work that we've done in the last 4 years. I try to approach this as a true public servant. I'm try to be careful about how much I do this just for my own benefit for whatever reason. Definitely not doing it for the money. You know, you don't get into this role for the money, that's for sure. You don't get into this role because you get some sort of fancy perks. That's not what the mayor gig is in the city of Dubuque. It's actually really hard work. It's something that you can approach in multiple different ways. You can take a little bit more of a hands-off approach if you want to, or you can get in there and get your hands dirty as much as you want to try to really listen to people and do the things that people want. And the bottom line is, I love this place. I couldn't wait to move back here when I had moved away for a few years, and I wanted to be able to call it home again. And to be able to serve in this role has truly been an honor, and I'd like to be able to continue to do it. And looking forward to just the many, many exciting things that we have going on right here.
Well, we appreciate your time today, and we appreciate your service. No one could say you're not working hard. That's pretty evident. So wish you luck in the rest of the way, and thanks for spending the time with us today.
All right. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Bye.
Brad.
Brad.
Thanks.